Alafia. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents, the H3O Art of Life show. And this studio is filled with a presence, and it is the presence of Dr. Margaret Taylor Goss Burroughs. Her birthday was November 1st, and we always remember her all the time, but especially around the time of her birthday and around the time of Black History Month and around the time of Mother's Day and around the time that we see each other and talk about anything worthwhile. So today we have a wonderful person who is going to write a biography of Dr. Burroughs, and she is doing her research and she's interviewing people to make certain that she gets it right, and we want her to get it right. And this is Dr. Mary Ann Kane. So happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have to start out knowing how it came to be that you decided to write this book.
Well, there's kind of a long backstory to that, so
Okay.
if you'll bear with me,
Tell
I'll tell you the story. I had no expectations of writing about Dr. Burroughs. There was never crossed my mind that I would write a book about her, but the story is about how I got to know her, and when she passed 3 years ago, I felt this huge loss. But I think the story you want to know is, well, how did I get to know her and why did it matter to me?
Yes.
Why she, why I want to write a book. I was doing some research on Bronzeville back in 2002, and it was a novel that I was writing, and I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. My mother's a South Sider, and so I wanted to have some of the setting of the book in Bronzeville, and most of the book is in the suburbs, but some of the characters were from Bronzeville. So I wanted to make sure I got it right. And I went to the DuSable thinking I might get some, didn't know anything about it. In fact, I grew up not knowing about the DuSable, which is unfortunate, I think. So when I went there, I didn't know what to expect. And I came in and I didn't see anything about Bronzeville, but I went through the galleries anyway. I was writing in my journal about some of the art, and one of the security guards came up and he just started chatting with me, said, "What you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just writing," and I wanted to know about Bronzeville. And the next thing I know, he brings Teresa Christopher down.
I was going to say Teresa had to be off that day.
No, she was. He went up and got. I couldn't believe, that he would just go get a curator because I wanted to know something about Bronzeville. So the spirit of generosity was. That was my first indication of Dr. Burroughs' spirit, because the museum was infused with that spirit of generosity. Teresa was infused with that spirit of generosity. She, very busy woman, sat there for half an hour in a corner of the museum and just said, "You need to talk to this person, this person, this person," gave me their phone numbers. And then next thing I know, she's given me Dr. Burroughs' name and phone numbers, and said she founded the museum. And I looked at her and I said, "She'll talk to me?" And she said, "Yeah." And it's a little intimidating to call somebody, but I did. And that's kind of where our relationship took off, is that I wanted to know about Bronzeville, so I met her for lunch at Pearl's Place, and we had other meetings. She looked at me on that first meeting and said, "So you're going to bring me to Fort Wayne?" That's where I live and teach as a visiting writer or artist or something for the university. And I was already so impressed by her that I just said, "Well, of course, I'll bring you." So we did. We brought her to Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne. We call it IPFW. And she gave a reading of her poetry because we needed her. My husband is the director of the Visiting Writer series, and I help bring, give suggestions and so forth. So we had her do that at one of the community centers, but it was for the university. We do these kind of partnerships sometimes. So she gave this poetry reading, and then she did some workshops with the young people at the community center. And they loved her so much that they brought her back a couple years later just for the community center. And so I got to know her in those times. But the one day that really stands out, and that the book that I'm writing is framed around, was a walk that I took with her in Bronzeville in, I think, 2006 or so. It was August. It was very hot. And I wanted further research for my novel. And I had done some research on landmarks in her neighborhood that I thought it would be interesting if she and I could walk around and she could comment, and then I could take notes and learn more about the place. And I was already getting very interested in Bronzeville because A, my mother is a native South Sider, farther south, but B, her father used to sell to the local grocery stores. He would give, sold candy and cookies and stuff, and he started that in the Depression. So my family's fortunes and the fortunes of people in that neighborhood intersected, which I was just learning about. So I was really interested. And in fact, one of the stores that my uncle, who took over the business from my grandfather, used to service, actually was still servicing even into his 70s, was 2 blocks from Dr. Burroughs' house.
Really?
Yeah. So I just started to get very interested in the neighborhood. And so I asked Dr. Burroughs if she would just walk with me, and she did, which again, her generosity was so, it's just so, just big. She's just a very big spirit. She never said why. She never asked me. It was just like, of course. I didn't have to give reasons or explanations. If I wanted to do it, she just because she knew it was a good thing for people to know about this place and these people. And to know it in ways that you don't see in the daily news, and you don't see, even in some of the historical accounts, although I think some of that's been corrected. But certainly not the image that I grew up with. And most people, when they watch, WGN as a superstation, so the people across the country watch the news in Chicago, they don't see the Bronzeville that I saw the day that I walked with Dr. Burroughs. So somewhere she must have understood that, this was just another part of her legacy of getting people to see things through their own experiences and without the filters of other entities that might distort the truth of what you can see. So we did take this walk, and every chapter of my book is going to have a little bit about that walk. It's going to open with just a little story, part of that story. And the book is called A Walk with Margaret, The Legacy of Dr. Margaret T.G. Burroughs.
Okay. So,
So just to say a little bit more about the walk, because it was such a beautiful experience. It was again a very hot day. She was in her late 80s, I think maybe 88 years old, and I was asking a lot of her, and but she said yes, and we went off. We couldn't walk more than a few steps without somebody coming up to greet her, to thank her, to tell them news of how they're doing, or I'd never met anybody like that. And I'd never, in a big city, to be in that kind of neighborhood where it's a very big, active city, to be known so intimately and personally by so many people. I was just amazed, just absolutely amazed, and humbled by what kind of. That's where I think I had to write this book, is because how come I didn't know about her earlier in my life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why don't more people know about her? They need to know about her, because what she stood for and what she accomplished, we need to look at and value a lot more than we do. So she took me around to, one of the places we went to was the hardware store on, I think, 35th off King, that used to be Louis Armstrong's club.
I didn't know that myself.
Is that right? Well, it's Meyer Hardware.
Okay.
It's owned by the grandsons of the man who bought it from Louis Armstrong. And if you go in the door, in the back wall, there's a mural that is from the original club, which is protected by the Historic Society. And then in the back, there's kind of where the policy wheels were. So there's like a little tote board there. Mm-hmm. And then there's, the upper stairs to where there were, the ladies of the evening, did their things. So there's still some of that, that's preserved back there. But the thing is all she had to do is walk in the door, and I think his name is David Meyer, the grandson, came and greeted us and knew who she was, and anything she wanted, he would do. And just because she asked, I got to see these things. I mean, something you don't even know about, which is interesting.
I gotta go walking with you.
Yeah. Well, he even asked me out on a date. So maybe he'll remember me. No. So that was just like one piece of it. But then one other thing that really I remember from this day, and there are lots of memories, but I'm just going to just give you this one last one, is when we were crossing, she was showing me, was it Lake Meadows, where they have the art fairs, and so I was just looking at, pointing out that area. So we were on that side of King Drive, and then we were crossing back over, and as we were crossing that big, wide street, there were two women in a car who started yelling out, "Dr. Burroughs! Dr. Burroughs!" And one of them was holding that book, waving it. "I got your book! I got your book!" And it had just come out. I mean, it had just been published within the last, couple months, I think, something like that. Unbelievable. So this is a little bit of why I feel compelled to.
When did you start when did you start the project?
A couple years ago.
Okay, how long do you expect to be working on this project?
Well, it was interrupted. I had some health problems, so I had to deal with those. Mm-hmm. And then I had a house that burned down in a fire in Colorado.
Oh my goodness.
It was a vacation. It was a place, kind of my husband and I, just our hearts are in Colorado because we lived there for a while, and we would go back every summer. So we're rebuilding. So last year was kind of a rough year. We had a lot of challenges, but I've since written a first chapter this summer. I wrote a description of the book, and Northwestern has offered me an advance contract, so that's motivating me.
So now you know you're going to write this book.
That's right, because somebody's waiting for it.
Right. Wonderful.
Right. So I'm hoping, and I'm on sabbatical leave right now from teaching. That ends in January. So I'm doing as much as I can to get these kinds of interviews and things that require face-to-face.
What kinds of questions are you asking people?
Well, it depends on who I'm
you're
talking
asking.
to. Yeah.
Okay.
So with with Deborah Hand and with Diane Dinkins Carr, I was interested in, you know, what kind of influence that Dr. Burroughs had on them, how their knowing her, you know, had some shape on their lives, because I'm not writing just a biography. I'm really looking at the question of legacy and how do we pass things on in meaningful ways, and how and also the uptake. You know, what does it mean for us to receive a legacy? Because Dr. Burroughs received legacies from the people who came before her, the people whose shoulders, as they say, she stood upon. And then, you know, how did that get passed on? And part of it, I think, comes from, you know, I think we're in a moment, a cultural and a historical and social moment where that's in question, that's in jeopardy. That what Dr. Burroughs has to pass on is not necessarily going to be passed on, or at least not in a way that enough people are going to have access to it and to have it something to be able to use for themselves. I think part of that, and this is something I talked to Timuel Black about, the question of technology. And you know, clearly I have my iPad with me and so forth, where I'm not averse to technology in any sense, but I also see how it can change relationships between people, and sometimes for the better and sometimes not necessarily for the better, where you have that sense of intimate contact with a person, that there really is a sense of hands-on, both literally and figuratively, that you're touched by someone, you're moved by someone, and that has to be part of, you know, it can't just be information that you get off the web. I mean, that's fine, and I'm not against that. I think that's very important, but it's also how you get it, and what's the relationship to the person who you're getting it from, that I think is a part of how legacy is transmitted. But that's neither here nor there. This is to really look at what Dr. Burroughs had to offer in terms of a way to look at our current situation, you know, and what things look like through the lens of what she provides us. So that's how I want to focus the book, not just a straight biography, because I'm not a biographer. I mean, I'm not trained for that, but I can tell a story.
Have you written before? Have you written a book before?
Well, I did the novel that I was researching, and that was published by 13th Moon Press, which is one of the first feminist presses. One of the first feminist literary journals, I should say, in the country, and the longest running literary journal for feminism. Yeah. So I have that, and I've published a couple of other books in my field of rhetoric and composition studies as an English professor. And I've published short stories and prose poems and a couple of poems here and there, although my husband's really more the poet than I am. George Calamaris is my husband. So, you know, I have an academic track record, I have a literary track record, and this book was, I teach creative nonfiction, so this sort of falls into that category, I suppose.
Well, I think that you are a likely candidate to write this book.
Okay, I pass muster. You think I can do it?
I think you, well, I tell you one thing, you better do a good job, because we'll come looking for you.
Yeah.
Because she is truly a revered person. When you mentioned, you know, how when you walked with her, how people greeted her. She's and you also talked about what she accomplished, and I always like to think of that as, you know, not a past tense. because she continues to accomplish well beyond, because she established institutions, and her legacy was something that sometimes you got by osmosis, by virtue of the fact that you interacted with her, or you knew her, you were in some sort of relationship with her. She was my high school art teacher.
Okay.
And I'm reluctant to say that because I didn't do very well. I wasn't required to do very well. I was just required to take the art class and to create things in the art class. I did have a classmate who was an accomplished artist, and one of her favorite people, Ramon Price, who was also at the DuSable Museum as a curator before he passed away. But when I became a teacher, I was aware that she had started a museum in her home, and I took my classes to visit the museum. And the thing about Dr. Burroughs, your relationship with Dr. Burroughs, is that you really don't have a good idea of what this is, who this is, because she was not pompous. She was not. She had all of these accomplishments. She was multi-talented. She was, I guess, in some sense, a pioneer in many areas and what have you. And she was just huge, larger than life person who seemed to be the same as you. And so you didn't realize until much further into knowing her that this woman was an entirely different human being than anybody else you had ever met before. And so after a while, it did not surprise you when you began to find out things about her, like she had now transferred this DuSable Museum out of her living room, and it was a huge building over there in the park, or that the Southside Community Arts Center was still standing after, being founded somewhere back in very near, certainly World War II, but very near Depression days, that here was a person who did not know that you couldn't do stuff. She did everything that she did unceremoniously, and we marveled in the last show that I did about her that she did all these things in the same amount of time that everybody gets every day. Everybody gets the 24 hours and the 7 days. Dr. Burroughs was engaged and involved in things not only locally, but all over the country and all over the world. She never seemed burdened by any of that, and she never seemed overwhelmed by any of that, and she never patted herself on the back. She did not humility was her middle name. She just simply, you'd find out that she'd done this marvelous thing, like, help people all over the country start museums. You didn't know this. You wouldn't hear it from her. She would never tell you. You would never get her resume from her. You would find out from other people that the two of you knew that Dr. Burroughs was all this person, and she probably knew everybody of any prominence anywhere she went, because I think people might have sought her out, but the thing was, and people gravitated toward her. Like you said, you invited her down, and then they invited her back, because she has an affinity for people, and they have an affinity for her. But the wonderful thing for me is that Dr. Burroughs loved in generations. You know, I had been her student, and I was a loyal, dedicated follower. I liked the things she stood for. I tried to stand for some of the same things. But then when I introduced her to my daughter, she took an immediate interest in her and supported her to the extent that she may have, in her interview with you, told you that she gives her credit for everything that she did and everything that she now does. Mm-hmm. And in our house, in her room, there's this big giant picture of Dr. Burroughs, you know, and then she's got all kinds of smaller pictures of her with Dr. Burroughs here and there and every place else. But she was that kind of person. She would not only help you, but she would love you in the course of extending whatever resources she had to you. Did you find that that was common, that people said that about her?
Yes, to the people in Fort Wayne who met her and got to, well, actually people who had met her in the past got to re-meet her, and then she met a lot of new people there. But also, yes, to the people I've been interviewing for the last year and a half, that there was just that sense of largeness of spirit and the sense of she just loved, you know. And actually, since I've been here in Chicago for my research trip the last few days, and I was at the Art Institute yesterday, and I was at the Museum of Contemporary Art, just looking for some way of understanding her times, you know, and her context, what was going on while she was alive, even though she might not have been a part of it. So I'm going through these museums and I'm thinking about her, and then I'm talking to, you know, folks who knew her on this trip. I'm thinking, gosh, she just accepted everybody.
She did.
And that, it's something you can know intellectually, but to really feel that, it's really taken some time for me to appreciate the depths of how she lived that. And I think as I keep going through my interviews and my research with her, my sense of that just continues to deepen, and my appreciation for that, and the sense that she still has something to offer me is profound. And my excitement over this project is in large part because I feel like it keeps me in touch with her spirit. Deborah said something in when I was just talking to her before the show today about sculpture and art, and I want to talk about this in terms of the sense of legacy that that Margaret Burroughs has made very tangible to me. So what Deborah said is that when she does sculpture, she feels, and she was talking about the brother that she lost, and that's how she kind of got started with sculpture. It was a way of still feeling that person through the touch of what, you know, the clay or whatever you're sculpting with, and that sense of, again, carrying something on through that medium. Well, my medium is words, and that's kind of what I feel is happening with this project, is that I can not only be in touch with that spirit, but I can deepen my relationship and learn and live through that spirit in ways that, honestly, I never would have predicted that this was going to be my life. But sometimes, you know, you just have to take the opportunity as it presents itself and go with it.
Well, you know, it's a privilege to be able to find that purpose, You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's not always the case that people find something that is so worthwhile and so rewarding, so gratifying, you know, that you get to study, you get to study a beautiful spirit, a great human being, an unpretentious person who was fully, from inside to out, from stem to stern, or whatever that expression is. She was fully aware that she was an African, that she was a woman, that she was an artist, that she was a mother, that she was a wife, that she was, she knew herself in all the aspects that one can know oneself. And in addition to that, she had to be a very good judge of people, because the people who were her associates were the people who reflected her in many ways. During that time that I knew her, if there was anybody worth admiring, they knew Dr. Burroughs and admired her. If you looked at this person as this is a great person, this great person was an associate of Dr. Burroughs. They were her associates. All the people who were doing worthwhile things were her associates. She was, and she says this in her own autobiography, social justice, serving mankind, serving humanity, these were just part and parcel of who she was. And she went to great lengths, but not with fanfare. She just did a lot of things for a lot of people, most of which is unknown except by the people for whom she did these things. She just found a way every day, all the time, to be giving. And there's a chapter in this book, that was part of her philosophy. She believed in giving. She found ways to give. But she also found ways to share her resources in such a way that she didn't have to be there giving them to you. Establishing an institution where you can go and see beautiful art, or a museum where you can go and learn about historical events and periods and so forth and so on. So that she so much wanted to give that you talk about the gift that gives on giving. That's Margaret Burroughs, because her gifts keep on giving. And if you stop and when you stop to think about her, you just almost say all praises, because there's nothing that you can think about when I think about how she loved Paul Robeson. And she was, to some extent, persecuted a bit about her because of her association with Paul Robeson. Well, he stood for social justice. So did she. She didn't see any of this other stuff. That was not her politics. But the whole idea that you care about what happens to people, that you defend people who are being exploited and oppressed, that you sympathize with people who are suffering, that didn't have borders for her. That didn't have labels and names. That was what human beings do on behalf of other human beings. And she wrote a poem to her daughter to that extent, to tell her daughter that when she was away from her, she was not playing bridge. But she was busy, in a sense, trying to make the world better, trying to improve the lot of humanity.
I'd love to see that poem.
Oh, it's right here.
Oh, is it in the book? Oh, okay, I have the book.
It's in here.
Okay. I haven't read through the book for a while. So.
Right. Well, it's, and I thought it was interesting. I pulled it out while I was on the last show because somebody wrote one of her daughter's poem. Her daughter is quite an accomplished poet as well. I don't see it immediately, but we'll find it before you go. But the thing is that her daughter wrote a poem to her.
Oh.
And she and Reverend Sinclair has it and read it on the last show.
Okay.
But she also wrote a poem to her daughter, having her to understand that your mother's away from home a lot, but I am not wasting time here. I am doing things for you especially and for others like yourself. And in that regard, I think that when I saw that it was okay because I had children and I had a job and I liked to do civic things and I was away from home a lot more than perhaps I should have been. But I felt in the same, my feelings ran in the same vein that hers did, which was that you cannot send your children out into a world that is unprepared for them. So you have to go through there with a machete and you have to cut away those things so that you had to prepare a path, for your children to tread. And Dr. Burroughs was explaining that to her child, and sometimes you do have to explain to people that when you are not giving them your attention, it is not because you are not thinking about them, it is because you are thinking about them that your attention is elsewhere, and you of course have to find a balance, and that's a hard thing.
It is a hard thing.
Because there's a certain amount of guilt that goes with that.
A lot of guilt, I'm sure.
Yes.
But that's why it's an art. There's this. People don't understand art is a very everyday kind of thing, and one of the things of living a balanced life is being able to, have an artful attitude towards it, and finding balance. You need to have the sense of an artist, whether you literally create visual or whatever kind of art. It's that sensibility that gives you the kind of life that is quality, I think.
Well, Deborah sees an artist in everybody. She's always pointing out to people that part of themselves, that creative part of themselves that they don't seem to overlook. Because, in this particular corner of the world, we tend to limit things to definitions that don't really cover all the attributes. And so here you have, when you're defining an artist as someone who creates a life of balance, which is a beautiful way to look at that, but you know how unusual that is, don't you?
I do.
That people don't look at it like that, because an artist is one who creates art. That's painting, that's sculpture, that's music, that's writing, but
and it's a special tribe, it's
Right.
It's those people over there.
Right.
Yeah, and you have to have some kind of special talent that nobody else
Genius.
has.
Yeah.
And as a result of that attitude, the cultural attitude, artists don't have as much influence as they could and perhaps should have on the rest of the culture. We're kind of these, put up on a pedestal or denigrated, but we're not really seen as part of the everyday fabric of living, which I think is really what Margaret if I
Right.
may call her that.
Right, so-
Dr. B. I call her that sometimes because I just feel so close to her, but I don't mean to be disrespectful.
No, we that the show is called Remembering Margaret, and then we use the colon and we say, we spell it all out so you know the Margaret to whom we refer. But the important thing is that if you had called, I would never have called her Margaret. I would not have said Margaret to her.
Right.
But when you feel that intimacy and that closeness, you think of her as Margaret. Like she's kind of like yours.
Right.
And so you get to say Margaret, and then when you with other people who knew her well, then all of you get to say Margaret. But of course, you would not say Margaret to Margaret, and you probably wouldn't say it in other circles. There's a context in which it's appropriate to say her name. But she was just unassuming. And, it must be wonderful to suppress the beast of vanity. Because if you look at the last pages of this book, goes year by year, and it shows her so-called accomplishments. Are you kidding me?
I know.
Could I have a book that had this many pages donated to all the stuff, and some of this a catalog of works, a catalog of deeds, a catalog of honors?
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say about what we were talking about earlier with her giving, because you have on one hand she gave and gave and gave, and on the other hand you have, but she still accomplished so much. And this is something that, especially for a lot of women, that I think we need to understand, that balance is important, and yes, we need to give, and we need to take in and create, and have those other things in our lives that aren't, because otherwise you could be exhausted. And one of the things that I was just amazed about Dr. Burroughs is, just as you were saying earlier, is that she never felt the burden of any of this. It was just, this energized her. And that's another reason, as I'm aging myself and looking at myself as sort of an emerging elder in the world.
Well, you're not there yet.
Well, not where you are.
Don't start taking advantage of your AARP card.
I qualify for that, but I'm not quite there. But no, I mean, just that she's a wonderful role model in the sense that she gave, and she gave through her art, which meant she took time and did for herself, and she took time for the people in her life, and she took time for the community as well. And how do you manage all that? Or I don't even know if manage is really the right word, but how do you do that? I'm still kind of in awe about, and I don't have children. I mean, I have a husband, I have a dog, but and I have family and so forth. But I wasn't juggling that piece. But she, and I'm not saying that I don't know if she was perfect at it. I don't know if anybody's perfect at it. But maybe you have more insight about that.
Well, the thing is that when you said she took time, I think it just occurs to me that I didn't ever get a sense that time was a great concern to her. She's just simply, she did what she did. She did what she wanted to do. She had social activities. She was a world traveler.
Yeah.
She was not always in Chicago. She was getting a whole lot done here, but she was not always here. Sometimes you had to find out if she was in the country, if you were going to try to visit her or have any plans that included her. You'd have to find out if she's going to be around, because she would not only go on planned trips, but I learned today that Reverend Sinclair said she was going somewhere, and Dr. Burroughs said, I'm going with you. So that was like spur of the moment. And this was to an African country. You know, I think I'll go too. So, you know, I never got a sense of urgency around her. If you were with her, she had all the time. You know, however long it took. If she was somewhere, she was not trying to be someplace else. She was, a good word for her was she was present. Yeah. Yeah. Always present. I don't know what she would make of your iPad and you know, all of this stuff, and people looking at screens all the time and not at each other and not interacting with each other.
And that's the part that I think is the questionable part about the technology and the transmission of legacy. I don't think that what she has to pass on, Dr. Burroughs has to pass on, can just be found in a screen. It's not bad to have it in a screen, and I've certainly been happy that I can see a lot of her visual arts and then a lot of websites, and there've been a lot of interviews and videos of her. So my research has certainly benefited by the existence of this technology. But as you say, there's also the side of, I mean, every time I come to Chicago now, I'm struck by more and more people on the street looking at their phones, because more and more people have these things.
Or talking on their phone.
Talking on the phone. And you know, one reason I like coming back to Chicago is because I like the street, you know, and I like to look at people, I like to see what's going on, and more and more, it used to be just like the headphones, and I never understood like people wanting to go out for a jog. Like I took a jog this morning, and I would never want to put something on my ears. I want to hear. I want to hear what's going on around me, and certainly just for the sake of not getting run over by a car, right? You know. But no, people are just more kind of closed off, and so that does seem to kind of present some challenges to the relationships that Dr. Burroughs was generating, and art was really a vehicle for that. You know, to have people really, I mean, that she didn't even have to be there, but she was still there, and people could relate, because there was a community that formed around her and that she had been a part of, that she was passing on. I mean, she had, in the research I've done on her, profound community that she came into, that how could someone whose family came from the South, the mother was a domestic worker, the father, you know, was a laborer, how could she get an art education, become an artist, and then this institution builder from such humble origins, you know?
Because she didn't know she couldn't do it.
That's right. But she had all these people around her who, her mother, there's an interview with Anna Tyler that was done through the Smithsonian. And Dr. Burroughs said this in other interviews too, where young Margaret would be drawing in the evenings, and even though she was supposed to wash the dishes, Margaret's mother would say, no, go ahead and keep drawing, and then one of the other two sisters had to go do Margaret's chores. So the very first person in her life, you know, to support her art was her mother. But then she had, and I'm trying to remember the name of one of her early teachers. Okay, I can't think. Mary Ryan. Okay, it was an Irish lady, as she says in the book, Mary Ryan, who again just saw something in young Margaret, you know, in her art, and just, you know, encouraged her to go on with her education. And then Kathleen Blackshear, when she was at the School of the Art Institute, I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right. When Margaret ran out of money and she was not doing well in school because she was working just to bring in whatever money she could to pay for the school, an anonymous donor supplied Margaret with the money she needed to continue, and she knew it was Kathleen Blackshear. So she had people very close to her that supported her, but then there was also the settlement house on the west side.
The Jane Addams.
Mm-hmm. And there was a group of immigrant artists that, in fact, there was a show at the Art Institute just this past spring called "They Seek a City," and so Dr. Burroughs had one of her pieces in the show, along with Charles White and Elizabeth Catlett and others of her generation, but also the immigrants.
They were her contemporaries and her friends.
But then there was also some of the immigrant artists who taught at the settlement house, who Margaret would have had some lessons from them. Morris Topchevsky, I hope I'm saying that right, was I think he was a Jewish artist, and I know he's from I think Eastern Europe, but he was an immigrant, and so the same social justice sensibility came from those quarters. But then there was a group of those young artists who worked with George Neal, who did the Arts Craft Guild, and this was the precursor to what then eventually turned into the Southside Community Arts Center. So there were people in the community who were supporting each other, and that there were slightly older people like George Neal. He wasn't like much older than them, maybe 10 years, 8 years, something like that, who sponsored these younger people. And he would go to the School of the Art Institute and have his classes, and he'd turn around on the weekends and teach Margaret and her group what he learned that week. So that's the kind of thing that we need to keep having, to keep passing on the legacy. And if you do
we
it,
don't have the social context for that. You know, you think about the Depression and the New Deal, and there was visible poverty, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't have much. And though they didn't have much, they somehow found a way to help each other with the little that they did have. That context, I sometimes think, as bad as this economy seems to be, and as many predictions as there are that it's going to grow worse, that maybe not having so much affluence might bring out something good. Something good may come. When people have to share again, much more than they do now. Everybody has their own everything. They have, all the children have their own iPhones, But there was a time when people not only had to share a phone, a single phone in an apartment building that was on the first floor. And when the phone rang, whoever was nearby answered the phone and rang the doorbell or hollered to tell whoever the phone was for that, that they had a phone call. I mean, kids, when you tell children about things like this, people sharing an apartment, families, not one family, but families sharing an apartment, taking turns in a kitchen, taking turns with a bathroom. That's the era Margaret Burroughs was living in. Where people found a way to survive and even to thrive and develop. And of course, a lot of credit she would give to the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration, particularly his wife Eleanor. Mm-hmm. She was very fond of her, and I think Eleanor Roosevelt did come when the Southside Community Arts Center was opened.
Yes.
But the important thing was that there was a social context in which sharing was the norm. Mm-hmm. And you got to have the norm. You know, folks don't just up and do that, it appears. They don't just up and pass that kind of legacy on. And consequently, if we're going to ever see those good old days that Margaret Burroughs lived in, which were, you know, full of strife and full of social unrest and deprivation and a lot of other things that weren't so pleasant. Think about, here's a woman who in the midst of all of this is creating beauty and building institutions and going to art school to study art, because she didn't know she couldn't do that. Yeah. It was her vision, and she talks a lot about her vision. Yeah. Her vision she embodied, because she didn't know she couldn't do the dream. She didn't stop to think about how difficult or very nearly impossible it was to do the stuff that she did. Like you say, humble beginnings. Are you kidding me?
Well, you know, it also makes me remember that it wasn't just the arts groups that she was involved with, but there was the Washington Park Forum, which is where people would just go and stand on soapboxes and
denounce everything,
or they just talk. You know, I think they would. Some of the younger folks would bring. They brought like Paul Robeson, and he came, and they would just bring people. But there were like lots of little groups of people who would just get together and talk about the issues of the day, and they would. This is what Timuel Black was describing to me, because this is the end that he's coming in on. That there was a lot of crossover between people who were interested in the arts, people who were intellectuals, people who were, you know, kind of on the streets and activists, people who, you know, just from all different kinds of interests and walks of life. You know, African Americans, Jewish Americans, immigrants, working class, so forth. There was a whole spectrum of social identities that she could have these.
I knew they were going to do that, but I didn't want.
That's okay.
I thank you so much, Dr. Kane. I really didn't want to interrupt you, because I wanted to hear what you were saying. So you're going to have to finish that off camera.
Okay, will do. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. P.
Thank you so much. I hope.